This episode of The Biggest Table is brought to you in part by Wild Goose Coffee. Since 2008, Wild Goose has sought to build better communities through coffee. For our listeners, Wild Goose is offering a special promotion of 20% off a one-time order using the code TABLE at checkout. To learn more and to order coffee, please visit wildgoosecoffee.com. In this episode, I am joined by the owner and founder of Wild Goose Coffee, Nate Westwick. We talk about coffee a lot, but more than just coffee, we talk about why coffee is important for communities and how coffee might help us pay attention to the world around us. We also talk about Nate's new book, Clearing the Path, and his journey as an author. Enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Biggest Table. I'm your host, Andrew Camp. And in this podcast, we explore the table, food, eating, and hospitality as an arena for experiencing God's love and our love for one another. And today, I'm joined by my good friend, Nate Westwick. Nate Westwick is the owner and founder of Wild Goose Coffee Roasters, a specialty coffee roaster in Redlands, California. He is a former high school math teacher who works also in the spiritual formation department at Sandals Church, a multi-site church in Southern California, creating content aimed at bringing people along in their personal discipleship journey. Nate also recently published his first book entitled Clearing the Path, Connecting with God in a Cluttered World. He lives in the Redlands area with his wife of 24 years and his 3 teenage boys. Thanks for joining me today, Nate.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Yeah, Nate
Been
and I
looking forward to this.
Yeah, no, me too. And because Nate and I first met back, it's been like 12, 13 years now, when we were both attending Restoration Covenant Church at Redlands. And you and your wife graciously invited Claire and I, who were newly married, to join your small group. And who knew 13 years later we would still be friends?
It's been an utter blessing.
No, it has.
For sure.
Yeah. So what I'm excited to is, Nate is a big cheerleader of mine. And so Wild Goose is now helping sponsor and, bring to light the biggest table, which I'm excited about. I'm not sure where all of this will lead, but Nate, I just really appreciate all your support and
got to keep you well fueled, man.
No, it's true. And your coffee does bring me joy each and every morning. So
same here. Am I allowed to say that?
That your coffee is delicious? Yes.
I don't drink coffee much, but when I do, it's Wild Goose.
There you go.
And I do drink coffee much.
Awesome. So Nate, tell us about Wild Goose. Tell us what led you to start being a coffee roaster and provider?
Yeah, boy. That story could last quite some time, but I'll try to keep it relatively brief. At one point in time, so I was a high school math teacher. I always had this entrepreneurial itch where it just wouldn't go away. And over coffee with a friend one day, he made a comment that really just kind of ignited what had been about 7 years of latent thought. And I was like, oh my gosh, I could do this business thing. I could do it in coffee. And, the whole nature of coffee is that by our commerce, we can actually do good, across the world, really. And so part of my struggles with starting a business was I didn't want to do it just to line my own pockets. And so, with coffee, if we practice fair trade buying principles, and I can explain the difference between capital F, capital T, fair trade versus just what we do, which is what we call fairly traded. As long as I'm purchasing well from the farmers in Guatemala, Ethiopia, Kenya, et cetera, that purchase is helping to create a better life for families abroad. And then I also wanted to take that one step closer to home. And so from the very beginning, we committed to donating 10 pounds of food to local food banks for every pound of coffee that we sold. And so this idea of, it's kind of the early stages of social entrepreneurship. Now it's like a thing. This was back in 2006 when the idea first came. And the whole thing is just kind of ignited from there. I've always loved coffee, both from its practical standpoint, but also its communal standpoint. There's something about sitting and having a cup of coffee together with a friend that just seems to break down barriers, opens conversation. And that's always been something I've really enjoyed.
No, for sure. And yeah, your tagline is better communities through better coffee. And so you sort of touched on it, but how do you see coffee creating better communities, both where you buy the beans and then also here locally?
Yeah, it's funny. So I started the business while I was still in the classroom. And economically, it's really easy to see like, okay, pay a fair price, help people out, donate money to local food banks, help people out. So that part made sense. What was interesting to me is we were doing a back to school night or parent teacher conferences or something to that effect. And for whatever reason, the administration decided to put it in the gym rather than in everybody's classrooms. So I set up an espresso bar for the staff. After back to school night, come get a free coffee. And this was the early days of Wild Goose. And what was fascinating to me is I watched my colleagues linger in conversation 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour after back to school night was over. And I swear it's because they had a cup of coffee in their hands. And there's a really strange phenomenon that happens when there's even the smallest of physical barriers between you and me. If you and I are standing there talking, it just feels super awkward. But if I can hold something, casually sip something, now all of a sudden there's community that's happening. There's conversation that's happening. And I was watching this happen with my colleagues who wouldn't hang out necessarily otherwise. And yet here they were all hanging out. It was really, really lovely.
No, for sure. So I don't know how to ask this question, so I'm just going to ask it. So why can't that be just Folgers? Why do we need?
That's true.
Like
I mean, if you hate your community, you can serve them that kind of coffee. But no, it's interesting. I think there's something about things that taste good that inherently, I think, make us want to linger. When I've been in I look at my teenage boys and, we're a foodie household, so we really enjoy cooking and eating excellent food. And even in their teenage boy-ness, where they can just like pack in food like nothing else, there's something about eating something really, really tasty that causes us all to slow down, enjoy time at the table, having conversation, laughing. It's teenage boy humor, so sometimes that can be, hit and miss. But, and so I think the same is true with artisan coffee, with specialty coffee. So, if it's, I was thinking about, I have people in my life who I would consider like functional eaters, right? Like, give me the nutrition, give me the food. I actually had a friend tell me one time, if they invented a food pill where I wouldn't have to sit down and eat a meal, I would be totally down with that. It would be great. And I'm thinking, man, you're missing out, because so there's something about functional coffee. And then there's something about coffee that you sip and savor, and let it last for a while. And so I would say that's why kind of big box store-bought canned coffee maybe wouldn't invite that kind of community, because there's not that sip and savor, linger kind of a feel to it.
No, it's a mass-produced, it's a fast food, and fast food restaurants are designed specifically for you not to linger.
And get out. That's right.
The seats aren't comfortable.
Right.
It's not a place that invites lingering. Whereas, nice restaurants, places that want you to linger, they make sure everything is coalesced around that experience.
Yep.
So walk us through the experience of your coffee. Like, for people who don't know, like how does this all work? Sure.
So, when I first was getting into coffee roasting, I obviously had a ton of questions and kind of similar to that. How does it work? In short, we are taking two halves of a pit of a cherry. So imagine a cherry for a second, remove the fruit, and you got this pit. Well, in a coffee cherry, it's actually, the bean that we would say is actually two halves of a cherry. Those get processed, dried, bagged in 150-pound burlap sacks and shipped to people like me. So then we will roast the coffee. So the interesting thing about the end result is, if you want a really great cup of coffee, it's about 50% the green coffee the unroasted coffee that you're putting into the machine, and it's about 50% how you roast it and the equipment you're using, and then the other 50% is brewing. Yes, for those of you listening, I did used to be a math teacher, and that does not add up to 100%, but you get my point. Yeah. So sourcing excellent coffee is critical. And so for us, our process, if you want the most granular of details, we actually will call importers and say, hey, we're sourcing an Ethiopian coffee right now. We're looking for a good Ethiopia. Can you send me your top lots? And they'll send 200-gram samples, and then we'll sample roast them and cup them. So cupping is not like the athletic thing where you get all these funky looking circular hickeys on your back. But it's actually, you're tasting it with a spoon. And so we can have a whole table. We might have 8 to 10 to 15 different Ethiopias on a table, and we're tasting them all. And the ones that stand out and preferably the one that stands out the most is the one that we select. Because when we're buying coffee, it's not like, we're buying a 12-ounce bag. We're buying, up to tens of thousands of pounds of coffee at a time. And so it's kind of like test driving a car. You want to know that it's good.
Yeah.
And so that's our first preliminary process. And then at Wild Goose, we roast everything to order because fresh coffee is better coffee. And so an order comes in on our website, a wholesale cafe orders, 100 pounds or whatever. Then we, roast it the next day. And so that process is equipment, it's technical expertise, it's heat transfer, it's not scorching it, et cetera. And then we get the end result. So people ask about the coffee roasting process. And I often describe it as like if we were to take a green apple, if I were to cut up a green apple and hand you a slice, like how would you describe what you're tasting?
Usually I think of green apple, Granny Smith. I think of tart.
Mm-hmm.
I think of crunchy, thick-skinned.
Yep. Fair.
Yeah.
Maybe a touch of sweetness on the back end, but that's not the primary flavor. But now we cook it. And what happens to that apple?
The sugars are brought out. And so we have a sweeter,
correct,
more mellower.
Yep, 100%. And so, but you can, now if you overcook it, like let's say I'm cooking these green apples to make an apple pie, the kids are tormenting the dog and, I have to go, restore order in our household. I can overcook those apples, those sugars can overdevelop and they can turn into carbon. And then it becomes very unpleasant, right? You get that bitterness and things like that. And you taste way more of that than you do. You don't even know it used to be a green apple.
Yeah.
If you cook it correctly, you still get some of the green apple pleasantness. You get some of the sweetness. You get some of the caramelization, and everything works together in this beautiful harmony of flavors. And so our approach to roasting, not everybody's, but our approach to roasting is that we still want to taste the green apple. And we also still want to taste the sugars and not over roast things. That may be more than you bargained for in the answer, but
no,
that's how we do it.
It's super fascinating because, it's not a lot of people take time to think through, okay, how does this product end up in my cup, and
sure.
For us, for sometimes, just getting a morning cup of coffee in me so I can deal effectively with my kids is what I need. But there are also times where I do need a pour over and I do want, the beauty of the coffee to come through so I can linger and bring a little more brightness to my day.
Yep. Both literally and figuratively, right? With the taste.
Yeah. Yeah. And then each coffee then has its unique setup, or each coffee bean has its unique set of properties, because a coffee from Ethiopia is not going to taste the same as a coffee from Guatemala. So how do you then make sure you're paying respect to the bean and the farmers in that roasting process? Like how does that magic sorcery work? It feels like it.
Sure. So we still, at the end of the day, we still want to taste the green apple, going back to that metaphor. Yeah. And so, and then what's really interesting is coffee is a lot like wine in that, just as much as grapes bring in some of the local terroir and the flavors nearby, coffee does as well. And so, and say if you were to do a tour of the wine country in Napa, a Cab Sav at the top of the valley might taste different or will taste different than the Cab Sav at the bottom of the valley. And so even though it's the same region, and so with coffee, it's real similar. So elevation, even region to region, soil conditions, moisture, all of those things come into play. And so, a Guatemala from Huehuetenango farm A might taste different from the Huehuetenango farm B, even though they happen to be neighbors because of the way that the crops are cared for and all these things. And so this is why we do the sample roasting. And we roast to try to bring out the sweetness, but then the coffee itself will highlight it's natural, what it brings to the table, so to speak. So, and we try really hard to, like you said, to kind of honor that, if you will. And each one is different and unique. So we've had some coffees that we've absolutely loved on the sampling table, and we haven't brought them in because we're like, wow, man, we love that, but it's too similar to this other one we have, even though they're from different regions. And we like to keep a variety of flavors. And so, but in general, your African coffees are going to taste brighter, more fruity, those kinds of more fireworks in the cup kind of flavors. I'm drinking a Rwanda natural right now that honestly tastes like ambrosia salad.
Oh, wow.
And so we were hesitant to put that on our bag for the cupping notes, because I'm like, let's just give it a shot and see. Because if we don't keep ambrosia salad, I'm going to go with clementine, marshmallow, and coconut, because that's what ambrosia salad is. But
Yeah.
I just thought, we'll see if people understand. So I hope they do, because it's a great coffee. So, and then your Central American coffees are going to tend toward more chocolatey caramel, things like that. So we tend at Wild Goose to separate our collections into two main categories. We have the comforting coffees and the adventurous coffees. And so some of our adventurous coffees are from South America, and some of our comforting coffees are from elsewhere. So, but generally the comforting would be like that chocolatey, caramelly type flavors, and the adventurous would be more, the ambrosia salad type of a thing, right? Like, hey, give me something I haven't tasted before.
Right. No, and I have a subscription with Wild Goose, and I've always chosen the adventurous, and it's always fun because each month or every so often, however many weeks I subscribe to, I get a new bag, and I never know what I'm going to get. So it's always like, ooh, the differences, and I need to keep a habit of like cutting out your description so I remember what I'm drinking.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, we have people do that. Yeah. It's really funny. We just recently rebuilt our website, and so I was doing a test run on our subscriptions, and I placed an order for myself. And I told my staff, like, hey, this is just a test run, but I wanted to make sure that the billing, everything worked.
Yeah.
So we happened to be gone the first week of January. We're on a family trip. We come home, and I'm thinking, shoot, man, I don't have time to swing by Goose to get coffee, but I'm sitting on old coffee at home. And I happened to go check the mail, and in the mail is a Wild Goose subscription bag. So my staff forgot, and they sent it to me. And I was like, dang. And then I was like, wait a minute. No, I could actually use this. And I actually, I didn't know what was going to be in there. I knew that I had subscribed for an adventurous, and I got to experience firsthand, like cutting open the bag, like, what's it going to be?
Right. Yeah.
And it was magical.
No, it is. It's super fun. So one other thing, why the name Wild Goose? Walk us through this name, because I think there's a fun story in that too that you've told me.
Yeah, there's such a good story. So, in Celtic tradition, say way back in the day, right? Celtic farmers would go hunting wild geese, and they'd spend all day pursuing the wild goose, and it would lead them on these crazy, unpredictable adventures. And so at the end of the day, they'd sit around the campfire sharing of their stories of chasing the wild goose and what that adventure looked like for them that day. It became a term of endearment for the Holy Spirit. Chasing after the wild goose will lead you on crazy, unpredictable adventures that will far exceed your dreams and imaginations. And so, back rooted in Celtic tradition. And so I came across that story, and I'm like, man, that's powerful. And so I named the business Wild Goose for a couple reasons. Number one, no matter how successful it got, I didn't ever want it to be about me. I wanted to have a constant reminder that this is my pursuit of the wild goose. And, secondly, just to pay homage to the origins of that name. I think it's just, nothing, as I've kind of built this business from the ground up, nothing has gone according to plan, but everything has ended up way better than I could have scripted initially. And so, I feel like that's kind of God being playful with me. And so, and what's super cool too is, we're not branded as a quote unquote Christian company.
No.
And that's very intentional, because I want to be able to reach people who might not otherwise feel comfortable in a church setting or anything like that. But the number of times that I get asked that question, hey, tell me about the name of Wild Goose. Like, where does that come from? And I get a chance to share that with customers, and I swap God for Holy Spirit, so I don't want them to freak out. But when I say that, it's such a beautiful nod to God saying, yeah, like, I'm using your business as a ministry into the community, not just to provide basic needs like, food to local food banks, but also very real needs. There's a social aspect. There's a spiritual aspect to what we do. Our staff, we go out of our way to be extremely hospitable to our customers, because we don't know what kind of a day they're coming in with. And if we can bless them for those 2 to 3 minutes that they're in our roastery, grabbing a latte or a bag of coffee, like, that's great. And if they happen to ask why the name, that's even better. So, yeah.
So no, it's provided opportunities just to share, in ways that may not have been possible.
Absolutely. Yep. 100%.
So a lot of people drink coffee. As you reflect on your journey as a coffee roaster, what are some of the spiritual lessons we can glean from coffee, in the totality of the coffee experience?
Yeah, I love that question. I would say primarily the simplest thing we can all do is just to slow down.
Hmm.
My family and I were out of town last weekend. I was ditching my phone for most of the weekend. It was absolutely glorious to not be tethered. And they were in one shop and I wanted a cup of coffee. And so I was like, hey, I'm going to go, a couple doors down. And, I'm going to go a couple doors down and I don't have my phone. So like, let's just meet up, right? Like old school, right? Back when we were kids, before those things, kind of ruined our lives, but made them so much better all at the same time. So I go in and I ordered a double shot of espresso. And they asked, do you want it in ceramic for here? And my first instinct was like, no. Like, let me just get it in paper and I'll just go meet my family. I'm just here for the coffee kind of a thing, right? I didn't say that, and when they asked that, I thought, yeah, I will. I'll take that for here. And I sat at a table by myself. I didn't have anything to do because my phone was not with me. And I just sat and watched the cars go by and I sipped on my espresso and I thought, you know what? This is a spiritual practice. Instead of like today's society is so ridiculously high paced that just taking a minute to slow down. And I wake up slow. So for me, the discipline is not slowing down in the mornings because I start at like a -2, in the, RPM meters. Like, right. So I make a pour over every single morning. And part of my routine is just when I make that first, pass with the water and I just like lean down and smell the bloom. And that is part of my, like, just breathing in the goodness, if you will. It sounds a little bit silly, but I'm intentional about that practice. And, I take the time every morning to savor the cup. My morning routine is like brew the pour over, sit on the couch. If it's chilly, like it's been, I flip on the fireplace, and read my Bible, sip my coffee and pray before I even look at my phone or any of that stuff. And, but what's magical is when you take the time to do those things midday as well. Because I know, like for me, I'm a pretty high paced kind of a guy. And so I notice that my issues are, I can start the morning really slow, but then the second I get going, it's like 100 miles an hour, until I crash at night. And so one of the disciplines I've been trying to do is to even slow down and just, enjoy the coffee in the ceramic. When I'm at Wild Goose, taking a minute to just talk with a customer or chat with a staff member and just sip, savor, linger. That's a long answer to just say, I think we should slow down.
We should slow down. Yes. And,
yeah.
I think Keurigs maybe have a place in life. I don't know where yet.
I do, but it rhymes with Ashtan or something like that.
So
crash tan. I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah. I've never had a good cup of Keurig coffee. Let's just
I can smell it from across an office, and just like we don't have that at Wild Goose, but at church people will brew Keurigs. I'm like, oh, it's just abhorrent.
But that's the ease and convenience sake.
Yes.
And it's like, well, I just want caffeine. Like I'm not looking.
But that's back to the food pill, right? We're just doing the functional consumption.
So how do we prevent, like, because a lot of people associate with what you just said of like, oh, sipping my pour over, like, you're a hipster, you're just out of touch with reality. Like, there's these ideas we have of people who drink coffee and do pour overs that they're, and it's usually not positive. So how, like, for the person who's never done a pour over, what is it about a pour over that is beneficial, not just for the coffee, but for life?
Yeah. I mean, for the coffee, you just get so much better quality control. You get temperature control of the water, you get brewing ratios, you get all this stuff. Yes, I use a scale for my beans. Yes, I use a scale for my water. I just posted a video on my social media. I said, yeah, I'm a bit neurotic, but it's my neuroses. And so it's very close to me.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but again, it goes back to that, like there's something, if, and I do pour overs midday, like if I'm on the run, being forced to slow down and weigh out the coffee and, it's a 2.5 minute brew for 1 cup, like methodically swirling the kettle over the tops of the beans, like just that whole process is, it's got its own catharsis to it. And, the next step would be if I'm able to be spiritually attentive in that slowing down. A lot of times my mind is still going on all the things. And, but one of the things I've been trying to practice, even, and this isn't directly related to your question, but even, when I'm at work, I've been trying to take lunches, because as a business owner, it's really easy to skip lunches. And B, I've been trying to eat lunch out in the cafe area with no phone, no book, nothing to distract me, but just to pause and just breathe. And it might mean a conversation with a person. It might mean that I sit there bored. Like I'm super high 7 on the Enneagram for those Enneagram fans out there. And so I hate inactivity. I hate being bored. I've been trying to embrace the discomfort of being bored, because I think there's a spiritual practice in that as well. And just being able to say, okay, this moment doesn't have to be jam-packed. And like I said, I'm a father of, 3 teenage boys. We have an incredibly packed schedule. I have my hands in a lot of different projects. And so, it's not the, man, that must be nice, this dude's totally out of touch. It's like, no, I'm running 100 miles an hour, but the discipline of pausing to savor an espresso, the discipline of pausing to make a pour over, pausing to take a lunch without devices. Because I'm an input, like I want to learn. I'm always reading books. I'm in multiple books. It's, you know what I mean? But just like to set all that aside, even if it's for 10 minutes, like I'm not taking a half-hour lunch. Right. I don't have time for that. But even if it's for 10 minutes, just like sit. And I'll never forget, man, one day, it was a couple months ago, we have a sandwich shop next door to our place. And I ordered a Euro sandwich, and I just sat with the sandwich and a cup of ice water. And I was just like, so overwhelmed with gratitude. Like that moment to pause and slow down opened up opportunities for gratitude that wouldn't have otherwise been there, because I would have just glossed right past them because I was, running too fast. God, I'm so grateful for this Euro meat. It's so good. Mm-hmm. Lord, the nourishing of ice water. I know it sounds really dramatic, but like I was just like overcome by that. I was like, man, like this water is so refreshing right now. This moment to just pause is, now, am I amazing? And do I do that every single day? No. When I don't do it for a couple of days in a row, do I notice that I haven't done it? 100%. Right. And so just like any spiritual discipline, we all know what we need to be doing. We just rarely do it. Mm-hmm. And so that's where that discipline, just like going to work out, like you and I were talking before we started recording, like you and I both went to the gym, you're in Flagstaff and I'm in Redlands, and, but like that discipline of getting a workout in is good for our bodies. It's good for our mental capacity. It's, for me personally, carrying all the things I carry, it helps me to not be a terrible boss and a terrible husband and a terrible father, because I can just, work all that stuff out. So, it's just like anything else. We just have to be mindful.
No, for sure. And I think too, like a good glass of wine, like a good glass of scotch, which you and I both enjoy,
both.
being attentive though, like I think part of the beauty of food and beverage is that being attentive to what is happening, and not just as a utilitarian, functional aspect, but to be attentive in that small detail that might actually help us pay attention to other people. I think there is a correlation. If we can start paying attention, like you said, slow down, enjoy something, not for a half hour, but, a pour over takes 2 to 5 minutes, but what that can do for the rest of our days, I think can be profound.
I 100% agree. I not to get overly philosophical, but our society, we live in such an insulated society. It's raining here in Southern California today. I have the ability to avoid every single drop of rain if I wanted to, right?
Right.
When it's cold, I flip on the heater. When it's hot, I flip on the AC. When it's, I can control all of the environments, but what happens is I miss out on the reality around me. And so, when sometimes if I'm spending a few hours working from home, I'll sit out on the back patio, even if it's cold, I'll throw on the fire in the fire pit and put a blanket around, and I'm like, okay, like it's not perfectly comfortable out right now, but there's birds. Oh, I can hear those birds.
Right.
That's nice. Like there's there's, there's somebody mowing his lawn over there. That's less nice.
Yeah.
But like you were talking about, like being attentive and just paying it, like just noticing. I really do believe it does help me to notice, like, oh, my wife came home and she seems a little bit sad. Like, I might
Mhm.
not have noticed that before if I hadn't practiced the noticing. Maybe you're making a pour over and you're like, okay, the cupping notes say ambrosia salad. Like, let me see if I can taste. Well, I don't really get the mandarin, but I kind of taste a little hint of coconut. Great, we're noticing,
Yeah.
right? I'm not always in tune with my wife, but when I am, that's great.
Yes.
Noticing,
Right.
or my kids, right? Like,
Hmm.
hey, buddy, what's wrong? And they're boys, so they're not going to know, and they're not going to say because they don't know, and but at least
Yeah.
we can notice, right? And then even more on a deeper level, like, God, where are you moving today?
Hmm.
And those times where I can avail myself to those opportunities, whether it be with a customer, whether it be with my kids or my family or a friend or whomever, that slowing down, that noticing, that removing the insulations, and actually just like being present to the life that's around us, the flavors that are around us. I do see 100% parallel.
No, that's awesome. Which I think this provides a great transition because you've recently written a book called um, Clearing the Path, Connecting with God in a Cluttered World, which I think we've just been talking about. How has your journey with Wild Goose then informed this new arena of your life? Because you're not only a coffee roaster, you're employed by Sandals Church, which is a big multi-site church in Southern California, and now you've written a
Yeah.
book. So you really do run at 100 miles per hour. Walk us through then this new aspect of your journey and this publishing aspect.
Sure. Yeah. That was the fulfillment of a long time dream to be able to get a book out. The process of writing, I know that you've preached sermons before, and anybody who's had the privilege of preaching or anything like that, the communion that you have with God as you prepare to preach, and even as you're on stage preaching, right? Like that is a unique closeness with God. And I got to do that for the entire writing process. I just felt like God gave me the things to say. I don't want to make that overly like, thus saith the Lord,
Right.
It's not that, but just
No.
like, it's just that communion with God of like, man, this is so cool. And so, yeah, so the purpose for the book, I think, is the question you asked. You can correct me because I got a little bit off track on my communion with God bit, that whole communion with God bit, but
How dare you?
how dare I? The idea is, I wrote, well, let me back up. So I was reading, we were on a family trip. I guess we take a lot of family trips. People tease me, but, when you go 100 miles an hour, you need to also take time to rest and be present to family and create moments with each other. So we're on a long trip. And in 3 weeks, I checked my email once during that whole span. And that was because my wife was CC'd on an email. And she's like, Nate, you really need to respond to this. I'm like, I don't want to respond to this. That's why like we're on a trip. I try to unplug as much as possible. So I responded because it needed addressing. And nevertheless, there was 3 weeks of total declutter. And my goodness, man, it was like I legit, and I don't have any problem with playing games on your phone, but I legit, like the last time I played Wordle, this is a true story, was 2 summers ago because we were on vacation. I was doing Wordle. I love words. I love puzzles. And I'm like, I don't want to be tethered to this either. Like, it's not, the game itself isn't bad. It's actually cool. But I just want to be free of all of it. And so I did. I just like, I put my phone away for 3 weeks, except for to use as a camera, really. So the time that, like, the moments that I had, again, kind of that slowing down, being attentive to, we were overseas, so being attentive to the flavors of the food we were eating, being attentive to the scenery, being attentive to my family and how we're enjoying the moments. It was so beautiful. And in that span, and I was going through kind of a stressful period with Wild Goose. And during that span, I was reading a book, and it offered a challenge. And so I challenge you to read Isaiah 40 for a week straight and see what that does for your soul. And I'm like, challenge accepted. That sounds awesome. And I think I read that maybe on the plane coming home or something. I forget. So we get home after 3 weeks of decluttering, and I read Isaiah 40. And I'm like, man, that's a beautiful passage. And the next morning I read it again, and the next morning, and I read it for 6 days straight because, a week in the business world is 5 days, but I'm an overachiever. So we had to throw a sixth in there, but I Sabbathed on the seventh. So it was okay.
There you go.
But what stood out to me was that this is the passage that John the Baptist quotes to announce the arrival of Jesus in the flesh. And I'm like, okay, that's really big. Like that's really, and then of course, so then there's this thought of like, but if a name for Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us, what if Isaiah 40 isn't just for people walking the earth when Jesus did, but if Jesus is God with us, how can we take Isaiah 40 and apply that to our own lives? How can we, and moreover, when the dudes are walking on the road to Emmaus after Jesus reveals himself, what's their response? Weren't our hearts burning from within as he walked with us? Like, I want that kind of a faith. I want that kind of a relationship with Jesus where I'm like, man, my heart was burning from within because we were walking together. And so, as I dug deeper into Isaiah 40, it just seemed to unpack kind of a roadmap for how we can access a more intimate, authentic relationship with Jesus. And what's really fascinating is as you read Isaiah 40, for you listeners, I would challenge you, like, read it. It's a great passage. There's this thunder in the desert bit. There's like make the path straight bit. Like, I believe that's like what we can do in our hearts. Then it transitions into this really bizarre, almost like end of Job kind of a thing, like all these things about God and how he can, like, who he is. And I'm like, man, that's like, we make God in our image all the time.
Yeah.
And that passage in Isaiah says, no, like God is God. God gets to speak for himself, and let's pay attention to who he is based on what he says. And then it ends with the famous, those who trust in the Lord will renew their strength. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. They will fly on the wings of eagles, right? Like, yeah, there's this beautiful, I think I'm juxtaposed a couple of sentences, but there's this beautiful promise of hope. And so, I wrote the book because a lot of times I think people think that spirituality or spiritual practices, like I had a friend say, like, I'm not like you. I can't just go like sit out in a field and just like ponder the mysteries of God for hours upon hours. I'm like, we're more alike than you think, actually. Yeah. I can't do that either. So I think there's this construct that, like, well, the super spiritual ones like have to be pastors, or they have to be, seminary degree, or they have to be someone who has the freedom of schedule to go sit in a field for hours upon hours and meditate upon the mysteries of God. Right. Like, right. And I don't find that to be true. Like, I'm a business owner. I'm a father. I do the work with Sandals because it's a passion of mine. Mm-hmm. Like this spiritual life, this intimacy with Jesus is accessible to everybody. You don't have to be special. And so I wrote the book as a very practical guide for how to do that, based 100% on scripture. Because if it's my own ideas, that's who cares about what I think, right? But if it's God's word, I'm like, well, maybe he has something to say about that we can trust. And so there's a lengthy answer to your question, but that has always been a passion of mine, to be able to kind of demystify the spiritual life. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not as smart as Dallas Willard. I can't operate the way he did. Right. Right. There's so many spiritual giants out there, C.S. Lewis, like whomever, like I wish, but I'm not, and yeah. So, and I would imagine there's a lot of listeners out there who could relate to that. Right. Like, but we can all access the same Jesus. And that's the mm-hmm. beautiful thing about that.
Wow. You said a lot there.
Sometimes I say a lot. Yeah, say things. No, I can talk.
You can. No, and there was a lot of great stuff. So demystifying? I love it, because it's like, okay, I feel like you're demystifying coffee, and now you're demystifying the spiritual life. So like, yeah, which is great. Like, it should be accessible. It shouldn't be for the hoity-toity. It shouldn't, good food and savoring shouldn't be just reserved for people who can afford to eat out and access.
100%. And you know what, that you say that's really funny, because I'm going to derail just for a quick second. Yeah. When I look at So I'm in the specialty coffee industry.
Right.
There are times when I'll go into a specialty coffee shop and I'm like, I'm not cool enough to be here.
Yeah.
And I hate that feeling, right? I
Mhm.
absolutely hate that feeling. And as you said that, it just sparked, because I never really thought about this before. But when I look at the customers who come in to Wild Goose, we are intentionally down to earth as a company. Kind of our internal motto is we take our coffee, but not ourselves seriously. And so like we laugh, we have fun. And it's kind of
Right.
like if you've ever been to a fine dining restaurant and the server is just relaxed,
Mhm.
they're knowledgeable, but they're not pretentious.
Yeah.
And you just kind of, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and then you feel permission, like, what is foie gras? And, like,
Yeah.
oh, well, foie gras,
Yeah.
which, by the way, we had foie gras in France, and even my teenage
Mm.
kids loved it, which was great.
Yeah.
So, but there's just something that is it breaks down the barriers, and people can feel comfortable discovering and learning new things. And that's the type of climate that we have at Wild Goose. And you're right. Like that's what I tried to do with Clearing the Path. And the feedback I've had is that it feels very conversational. Like, yeah, it feels like you and I are sitting down over a cup of coffee and you're just like talking about things. I'm like, good. That's what I wanted, because we don't need to be building these walls up to make ourselves feel better. That's not the goal,
No, and especially in today's culture, we need things that break down walls and break down barriers
Absolutely.
and help people talk to one another better and help people relate to each other in more humane ways.
Yes.
And coffee plays a huge role in that.
It really does. Yeah, it really does.
And good books and good questions and good models that can help people find their way. We need voices. Did you ever expect yourself to be in this role?
I don't know. That's a good question. I learned. So I'm a future oriented person. I'm always looking on the horizon. I'm always wanting to see what's coming. And I learned, gosh, at least 10 years ago that while that is my natural bent, and that can be a strength because I can look and predict and see, things like that. Not always accurately, but maybe, more aware than others potentially. Not others, like, there's a lot of people with that natural bent to look in the future. And I've kind of stopped trying to predict where, like the clear path for me does not, I can't see a whole lot further than just a few steps ahead.
Right.
And I think that's one of God's graces to me, because then it kind of forces me to stay present to Him instead of getting ahead of Him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to your question, I've been, like, when you read the bio earlier, I was like, whoa, like, I guess I've done a few things, but I don't feel like it in the moment. And part of that is, maybe trying too hard in my younger years to try to predict the future and see where that path was going. And I think God's grace for us is to say, I'm here, kind of like in Exodus, right? Like, if the cloud moves, you move. And if the cloud stays, you stay, and just be with me.
Yeah.
So I guess there's my answer.
No, it's great. And so as we begin to think about wrapping up, as a coffee guy, what tips would you give for people to make a better cup of coffee at home? Like, where do people start?
Sure. So the two biggest components are get good fresh roasted coffee beans. You can find your local roaster. I obviously feel free to visit Wild Goose if you want to go. We do have a web store. I can confirm that it works because I got that subscription to my house by mistake. But it was addressed to me, so it wasn't somebody else's subscription. So that's good. But start with fresh coffee. I am adamantly opposed to over roasted dark coffee. That goes back to the green apple metaphor, where I'm chasing after the kids chasing after the dog, and the sugars burn, and now you're just drinking like really over roasted burnt stuff. It's really not good for your stomach. if you have a side note, people, if you can't drink more than 2 cups of coffee without your stomach being upset, it's because you're drinking rancid oils. So in college, I swore by, I'm not going to name the place, but it was actually like a higher level, larger produced. And I would open up it was a can, but it was whole beans, and they would be jet black and oily. And I'd be like, man, that's the good stuff. But the problem is those oils turn rancid with oxygen really, really quickly. And so if you can't drink more than 2 cups of coffee without your stomach getting upset, it's because you're drinking rancid oil, just as if you had 2 cups of sour milk. Like, of course your stomach's going to hurt. So stay away from that. An artisan roaster will roast and cut the roast before those oils escape and get to the surface of the bean. So there's a stage in the roast process called first crack, where you can hear an audible crack, kind of like popcorn. It is when the sugar development is super critical. So heat application is really temperate at that moment. You need to be careful that you're not scorching it and burning the sugars too quickly, but you do want to let them kind of ride out and develop a little bit. And then if you continue roasting, you hear second crack, which is when the oils move from the interior of the bean to the surface of the bean. And that's what you want to avoid. So if you have oily coffee, I would say ditch that right away. Don't freeze your coffee. Just store it in a, airtight room temperature container. Don't get it too hot. Don't get it too cold. Just let it chill. Let it be itself.
Yeah.
And, I always say to drink within 2 weeks of roast date. I joke with my friends that I'm a professional taster, so I can taste a little bit of a drop off in quality after 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
I taste a more significant drop off in quality after 3 weeks. So hence 2 to 3 weeks after roast date. And then use good water. And so stay away from distilled water that doesn't have the mineral content to, extract the flavor that you want. I use Crystal Geyser. I'm not a paid sponsor of Crystal Geyser, but I just go to the market. And, the other day I went to the market and I grabbed like a 6-pack, I guess, of gallon water. Some dude's like, that's a lot of water there, buddy. And like some customer, and he was kind of being critical. And I'm like, yeah, well, I use it for coffee. And then he kind of figured out what I do. And then he's like, oh, now I respect you more. I'm like, that's great. Thanks for respecting me now that we've had a conversation. But, so I buy it in bulk because I am thrifty that way. And, so good coffee and good water. And then the next step would be to up your game by considering doing a pour over situation rather than like a home coffee brewer, because those home coffee brewers brew at like maybe 180 degrees and you don't get the flavor extraction at that. So I brew at 205 because that's how I roll. So a kettle will help you to do that, and the pour over helps you do that.
Yep. I need to find out what temperature water actually boils up here at Flagstaff, since we're at 7,000, because I'm not sure.
Okay, so that's an interesting thing. Yeah, when I've traveled to elevation, I have to get it's a whole different ball game. It's a different ball game. Like when we go skiing in Bryan Head, Utah, and that's at 10,000 feet, and I actually bring darker roasted coffee, even though it's not my preference. But I'll find myself even brewing like a pour over, but espresso style. So it's like super dense and just a tiny bit, and it's very pleasant. But it's not what I would drink at home. But yeah, that elevation makes a big difference, because I think at Bryan Head it boils at like 195 or something crazy like that.
Okay, yeah. So we're probably around 200, hopefully here.
Yeah, I would guess,
because we're at 7,000.
Sure, 7,000. Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah. Good coffee. And speaking of ordering good coffee, Wild Goose, for our listeners, is offering a promotion. Am I correct in this?
You are 100% correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go to wildgoosecoffee.com and at checkout enter the promotion code TABLE, TABLE, you will get 20% off your order.
Yep.
So if you're interested in trying better beans and helping create better communities, do go buy your beans through Wild Goose, or find another provider that is local that sources great beans and does a great job roasting. But no, I highly recommend Wild Goose. And I'm excited because I think my subscription is coming up to get me another bag. So I just got my notice.
It's coming soon. Yeah. Nice. I couldn't tell you what it's going to be, but I know it's going to be good, because we just got four brand new adventurous coffees in last week.
Oh, sweet.
We did the production cuppings on all those, and they were very exciting.
Awesome. Sweet. Hopefully that's helpful for people. But as people know, at the end of the podcast, I love a few rapid fire fun questions, Nate. What is one food you refuse to eat?
Okay. So, I was talking with on Christmas Day. We were with my wife's family, and there's some Asian street food that's like a developed embryo in an egg.
Oh, balut from the Philippines.
Yes. And I'm like, no, like I'm an adventurous eater, man. But so I'm like, what is this? I start pulling up pictures. Now, refuse to eat because like I haven't had the opportunity to. And if I were, if I lost a bet or something, I probably would slurp it down. But it just looked disgusting. And maybe it's great, but there's certain things, man. And and like I'll eat almost anything,
Yeah.
But I won't do that.
Okay. I actually had the privilege of trying balut in culinary school. A classmate brought it in. I was like, dude, I will try that in a heartbeat.
How is it?
Fine. Like it's the
See?
psychological process of eating an embryonic chicken.
Yes.
That is, like it's weird,
But I mean, is the taste even like oysters are weird, but at least they kind of taste good.
Yeah, oysters are delicious. No, I don't remember the flavor and the taste too much. It was more of just
Then I stand by my answer. If it's not memorable to you, then I don't need to deal with that.
Right.
Because I respect your palate.
It's memorable in the fact that I can say I've eaten it, and it's one of those.
This is true. Yeah, if you had said it's one of the best things you ever tasted, then I would actually reconsider my list. But
no. So speaking of best things, what is the best thing you have ever eaten?
So it's always really, really hard for me to pick like favorite this or best that.
Right.
I will say, so we took a family trip. My wife's a teacher, and she says, I work so that we can travel. And I'm like, that's a great gig. I love that. So we were in France. I sound super bougie when I say this, and I'm not a bougie guy. I just like to hunt for a really good deal. So we got a really great deal. So we happened to be in France. But we were driving from the Riviera to the Alps, but via Italy. Okay, so I know it sounds bougie.
So bougie.
Don't judge me. I'm wearing a white T-shirt right now, and
you're a boutique coffee roaster traveling through France in the Swiss Alps. So yeah, bougie.
I just, my friends tease me. I like nice things. That's all. But I like nice things at a good deal.
Yeah.
So we're driving through Italy, and I joke with people like, yeah, I've only ever been to Italy for lunch. Because we stopped for lunch in Italy. My wife pulls up the phone. She's like, oh, she's like, I found us a spot. Just get off the highway and head down this hill. So we're up on the, top of a mountain ridge kind of a thing. We're heading down right on the coast, and there's this little seaside village. Couldn't even tell you what the name of the village was. And she finds this highly rated, restaurant, and we're sitting outside on a piazza for lunch. And my boys are all adventurous eaters. And so we're like making sure we're getting different things for, appetizers and lunch and this and that. And my oldest, after a couple bites, he goes, is it possible that the Italians do food even better than the French? We all just start laughing. We're like, I think it is. Like, sorry if you're a French food fan. Like, I'm a French food fan too. Like, French is awesome. But I was like, dude, this Italian food was just out of control. So good. And so just the whole moment was like this, like we're driving, we're in Europe together as a family. It's the summer before my oldest son's senior year in high school. And so we're just having these memories. Right. And then, we find this little, restaurant, sit outside, and it's just like the perfectly quintessential, like you sit outside on the piazza. Okay, cool. Like that's what people do. And I remember, this like afterwards, I asked the server, hey, where's a good place to go nearby for espresso? And she just looks at me like, everywhere. And I'm like, okay. So we found a gelato place. And so I go next door to this little cafe and I order an espresso. And by the way, Northern Italian espresso is lighter roasted, which is my preference anyways. The further south you go in Italy, allegedly, I've only been to Italy for lunch, Andrew, but it happened to be Northern Italy. But the further south you go in Italy, the darker roasted the espresso gets. That's where the traditional Italian roast kind of comes from, is that darker, further south. Anyway, Northern Italy, lighter roasted, more flavor, in my opinion, the type of espresso I prefer. So I order a shot, and, I'm sipping in my ceramic because I'm enjoying the moment. And I took a sip, and I just looked at the barista, and I just was like, respect, man. That was it was so good. I ordered another one.
Wow.
So that my wife, I was like, you have to have this. Like, I don't care if you don't finish it. I will. Like, it's that good. So, that whole experience was just pretty magical.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
we had already been in Europe a couple weeks, so I was like super detox from all the crazy hustle bustle. It was just like, we're just in the moment, we're just hanging, you know.
And finally, there's a conversation among chefs about last meals. And so, as in, if you knew you only had one last meal to enjoy, what would it be? And so, for Nate, if you knew you only had one last meal to enjoy, what might that meal entail and include?
Yeah. So it would 100% have to include scallops.
Okay.
It would 100% have to include a really great red wine. I'm not super picky with which types of red wine, as long as it's flavorful and yummy. So it kind of depends on the mood I'm in. And, you know, it would absolutely have to involve my family. You know, I was thinking about, you know, like one of my favorite meals I've had, Andrew, was when Laurel and I had dinner with you and Claire at Silver.
Oh,
And
right.
what made it so special wasn't just the food. It was that we had 2.5 hours, 3 hours, whatever it was, to just linger at the table and talk. And we hadn't seen each other for a few years. And I think about, like, I can eat a good meal solo,
Right.
but it doesn't taste as good.
No.
Like, there's the experience is missing. So if it's last meal, I wouldn't, if I were eating my last meal alone, it would, no matter what was in front of me, the whole meal would suck.
Yeah.
But if I could have my family with me, if it's my last meal, like if I'm getting executed tomorrow, like, dude, give me PB&J as long as my family's there.
Right.
Now, maybe PB&J, you know, I mean, if there's an option for scallops and nice red wine, like, let's go with that instead. But yeah, but scallops, man, there's something about scallops that just get me so excited.
That's fair. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Nate, this has been super fun, and it's always fun to connect with you, and just really do
Thanks
appreciate
for having me.
Your friendship. And if people want to get in touch with you, not only about coffee, but about your book, where can they find you?
Yeah. So on Instagram, I'm Nathan.Westwick. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I'm not the biggest social media guy. I think it's Nathan.Westwick. Let's go with that. And wildgoosecoffee.com. We also have an Instagram, Wild Goose Coffee. You're asking how people can get in touch with me. Those are probably the best two ways.
Right.
My book's on Amazon, but if you find me on Instagram, there's a link there too.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm a social guy and sometimes somewhat intentionally reclusive.
I get it. Yes. No.
Yeah.
So no,
you can hit me up on Instagram. That's a good way to do it.
Yeah, Instagram, and do check out wildgoosecoffee.com. You know, and do take advantage of the promotion code. Do take advantage of the promotion code table to receive 20% off one order. So Nate, really do appreciate you joining me today. And thanks for joining us on this episode of The Biggest Table, where we explore what it means to be transformed by God's love around the table and through food. Until next time, bye.